following message is transmitted.
All right, welcome back to the Order of Chaos podcast. Here we go, part 2 with Mitch Hororwitz. Real quick, before we get started, I just want to mention again, Blunt Force Astrology starts this Tuesday. So if you have ever wanted to learn astrology, but you found it to be confusing and overwhelming, then this is the course for you. Links are in the description. And Mitch, thank you so much for doing this again.
Glad to be here, my man. I enjoyed our first conversation, and it was so rich. We came back quickly for part 2, so glad to be here.
Yeah. So I there were so many questions I didn't get to. So this time around, I do have a list of questions I want to ask you that are pretty, they're just pointed questions, right? Like things I want to know. So number one, the first thing I want to ask you, how do you personally define magic?
I define magic as causative ritual. That's my definition. And it's a purposefully broad definition because, as we were discussing last time, I want magic to be open to both the believer, the atheist, the agnostic, you name it. I don't want there to be any fee of entry in terms of belief when approaching magic. So if you want to see it from a metaphysical perspective, as I do, all to the good. If you want to see it from a psychological perspective, all to the good. It's probably an amalgam of the two. So causative ritual is my definition.
I love that. That's a great definition. I ask this of everyone who comes on this show who's, spent a lot of time doing magic, because I'm not a big fan of Crowley's definition. I think it's very circular. And so I just like to
causing
hear
change, conformity with will.
Yeah, right. So I mean, it is a correct. I don't know. It's not the worst definition. It's just that what bothers me about it is that if my will is to get up, get in my car, and go to the store, and I do that, then it fits the definition.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I suppose. His is broad too. His is broad too. Obviously, within the Crowley framework, he's referencing ritual. He's referencing the outpicturing of will in some way that goes beyond motor skill, for example. But I understand that, and my wish is to define things very precisely, so that there can be no question what we're talking about. And when we are talking about ritual, at least I think when you and I use the term magic, and likewise, I want it to be broad enough so that it's not exclusionary.
Yeah, and I totally agree. But, my personal view on that is that, so like you were saying, there's the psychological model of magic. There's the spiritual model of magic. Because there's like the new player in the game, which is the simulation theory model of magic, which I think is also quite interesting.
Yes.
Right. But ultimately, for me, coming from, my kind of like platforms that I build off of are Buddhism and Hermetic philosophy. I'm neither a Buddhist nor like a strict Hermeticist, but I like these two concepts, and particularly with the concept of emptiness that comes from Buddhism. I think, all of these things that we're saying, spirit model, mind model, psychological model, they're all just different ways of saying essentially the same thing, just different modes of understanding, or like different languages. I personally, like we were saying last time, when someone asks you if you believe in ghosts, you could say yes, sort of, right? I would say, well, do you believe in dark matter? What about dark matter life forms? How about that? What about higher dimensional intelligence? You can use the word ghost, or you could use terms that make sense in the modern context. One thing that I think is really funny is like the concept of ether, which science is like, no, there's no ether. Stop talking about ether. But then they're like, but then there's dark matter. We don't know what that is. But it's
right.
They're kind of similar.
And there's space between particles that make up everything that is a thing, and we don't know what that is. I guess we can call it space. But arose by any other name is just as perplexing. So if you want to use ether, use ether.
Yeah, I think that we are coming to a point a really, really cool point in history where we are about to reopen the floodgates to living in a paranormal existence. And people are just going, this is just the way it is. There's stuff we can't thoroughly explain, but we can see. We can see it
Yes.
happening. And you have to be in active denial to not see it. Right.
Yes.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, that's really the theme of this new book that I'm working on, Multiverse. And I face two challenges with that book. The first challenge is not getting overly attached to concept, because the many worlds theory and the concept of a multiverse extrapolated from it, I believe, do something very, very, very constructive and important to help us see reality, see
Yes.
more of reality.
Yeah.
You know, the shutter takes in just one more piece of light, and we get a little bit more a sense of what's going on. At the same time, it's just conceptual. It's just really even just metaphorical. So I don't want to get overly attached to it, even though it's my vehicle. The other thing is, in the book, as I do in my articles on parapsychology and on mind magic, mind metaphysics, I am considering whether there exists a bridge between mechanics and cognition. And that is a question probably based right now on experimental evidence that emerges from parapsychology, study of ESP, precognition, telepathy, retrocausality, as well as some of the research that people within the transcendental meditation world are doing into what they refer to as unified field. And all of these things are different ways of trying to get at this same concept, which is that not only do there exist different folds within reality, but a book that I'm reading right now by Dr. Tony Nader, Consciousness is All There Is, he argues from the unified field theory, and he argues, as did any number of quantum physicists, Sir James Jeans, Max Planck, even really Schrodinger himself, that there is a foundational bed of consciousness from which all that is emerges. And making the leap from that verity to cognition is the challenge. And that challenge exists within TM, transcendental meditation, as well, because the notion is that repeating this mantra brings you down to this unified field, and everything that is a thing emerges from that field, and you're supposed to receive what is sometimes called nature support from that field. It's obviously very calming. We know concretely that TM lowers blood pressure, reduces stress-related illnesses, and so forth, helps people with PTSD. So there again, we have experimental evidence demonstrating that something happens. Is that something? And I ask the same question in parapsychology. Is that evidence of the bridge that I'm looking for? Is that bridge there? Is it real? So that's what I'm probing.
Very, very cool. Very interesting. I agree. So my book's not available yet. I just handed it into the publisher a few weeks ago. But I did touch on this in my essay in This Is Chaos with Pete Carroll and a number of other authors. It's a Chaos Magic Compendium that came out a couple months ago.
Excellent.
I believe in panpsychism. So that is that consciousness is the fundamental reality. So what we would call in the Kabbalion the substantial reality or the all, to me that's mentalism. It is consciousness as the fundamental substance from which matter arises rather than the other way around. Because the other way around, we hit a brick wall, and that brick wall is the hard problem of consciousness. But if you flip it around and say, well, matter arises from consciousness and perception is kind of everything, it all starts to make a lot more sense. It's a lot easier. But either way, these are very difficult. It's difficult to prove either way, right? It's a belief system, which is wild to me because now we've hit this sort of it's like the same problem. Physics is facing the same problem that the medieval world faced, where the Christians wanted to wipe out the pagans. Well, the materialists want to wipe out the idealists in terms of physics now, right? And it's this big fight, and it's fascinating. I watched a really great interview with it was Diary of a CEO podcast, and Max, or was not Max, Eric Weinstein was talking about this, and it's
Mhm.
phenomenal. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that consciousness is fascinating, and that the different interpretations of quantum mechanics are ways in which we can start to understand the paranormal world that we live in. You know, the difficulty, of course, is that neither you or I are physicists.
Yeah.
You know, and so we have to make that clear. Like, it's one of the first lines in my book is, I'm not a physicist, I am not a psychologist, I'm friends with physicists and psychologists, I'm an occultist, right? And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. I can prove to you that magic works, and then I can do my best to explain you how.
Yeah, and this is my take on that, because I think you're raising a very important point. I am a dedicated layperson. I am not a parapsychologist. I am not a physicist. I am not a clinician. I am, if I call myself anything by profession, I'm a historian. If I pan the camera back more, I'm a seeker. I'm not a teacher. I'm not anything like that. I am a seeker. I share experiences from the path, assuming that my life is not exclusive, that no one's life is exclusive, and that what happens to me has some resonance with another person. As far as dealing with the complexity of quantum theory, quantum mechanics, parapsychology, clinical study, I look at it this way. When our system here in the United States, and I would extend that to Canada, of course, works well, when our legal system works the way it's supposed to work, uh, we have juries in this country, and juries are considering forensic evidence that can be literally a matter of life and death, can literally convict someone to jail for life. I don't expect a jury foreman or a jury member to be an MD, to be a clinician in order to weigh the question of DNA evidence on which someone's life or death, or pronounced guilt or innocence, freedom or imprisonment depends. It's as real and as serious as it gets. And the premise of the jury system, and it's a wonderful premise, and when it works correctly, it's a wonderful system. The premise is that capable men and women who are able to follow instructions and follow lines of reasoning, in this case, the application of the law, can review very complex forensic evidence and make a reasonable judgment call as to whether it's persuasive. That's what we do when we're talking about clinical matters, when we're talking about physics, and so on and so forth. I am that jury foreman who is listening, who is paying attention, who is capable of application of ideas, of principles, of frameworks, and I'm applying it. It's that simple.
Yeah, and that is such a great place to be. And I wish everyone could approach magic from that point of view, because, like we were talking about last time, when you reject this stuff on principle and you never give it a try, you just close your mind off to any of these possibilities. I know that people are missing out on a tremendous aspect of the human experience by doing that. And I really want to have a hand in, however long I'm here on the, actually, I'm going to be here forever. I'm never going to die, but, I want to help change that. I really do. I want to open up people to these experiences because they're incredible. Like, for example, I've never tried transcendental meditation. I
Mm,
have gone through the gateway process, which I think is very similar,
that's
but
true. Yeah,
you know,
Gateway is
uh,
wonderful.
yeah, and I create my own binaural guided rituals. I sent you one.
Yeah,
Um,
looking forward to doing it. I was just
yeah,
waiting for my candles. They're here, doing it tonight. Yeah,
sweet. Yeah, sweet.
yeah,
Yeah. Very cool. So I create these because I've had these experiences, and I know that other people can have them too, and
yes.
that your mind is more than people tend to think of it. Like, with my beginner students, I'll often point out, your mind is completely non-physical. Point to it. Show me your mind. You
Hmm.
can't. And even that thought's like, oh, hey, never realized that before. Your mind and your brain are two very different things.
Yes. One of the great gifts that idealist philosophy has given to the world, idealism being the philosophy that life is perception,
Mhm.
and the debate and the scale within idealist philosophy is the question of whether our awareness or perception is the ultimate determinant of what shows up, what happens, in the same way that a particle is not actually localized until perception or measurement in a physics lab. And what is our sensory apparatus really but a technology, a biological technology of measurement. We smell
Totally.
something, we sense distance, we touch, we sense heat, cold, what have you. Um, One of the gifts that idealist philosophy has given us, even in its most conservative iteration, is that whatever reaches us, whether we call it sound, whether we call it touch, whether we call it sight, it really doesn't exist outside the sensory organs. So just from that one starting point alone, one should feel in awe of the extent to which perception is reality.
Yes.
Now, a figure like Max Planck or James Jeans would argue that perception, awareness, is ultimate reality. And I think that's more and more becoming almost a logical necessity. But whether or not one wants to dive into those waters, the very fact that the famous idealist parable, this probably goes back to George Berkeley, who was a 1700s idealist philosopher. The famous idealist parable is, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a noise? And the logical necessity of that answer, if one wants to get scholastic about it, is no, there's no noise. There's vibrations.
There's
We
pressurized
could put
airwaves.
what?
There's pressurized airwaves, but
There's pressurized airwaves,
without an
and we
ear,
can
there's no
measure
sound.
that. Right. Put a seismograph there, and
Yeah.
or hell, just put a pendulum, going over some sand, and you'll see that those pressurized airwaves are there, and they're real. But sound, I make that happens up here in the gray matter,
That's right.
or maybe it's an amalgam of the gray matter up here and some sort of non-local mind, because we have just incontrovertible evidence for that. But
Yeah.
whatever the case is, your seismograph or your pendulum or whatever will tell you that there's compressed airwaves.
Yeah.
But sound, no.
So it's really interesting because I love this line of thought. And last night, or maybe 2 nights ago, in my classroom, I read the Divine Paradox to my students, and we discussed it. And I think that the Divine Paradox is so important because we can know this, and that knowledge alters your perception of reality entirely. When you just even understand the fact that there is no sound, there's pressurized air, and the sound is something you create in your mind. To really cognize that can blow people's minds. But then you also have to treat reality as though it's completely real. You can know that it's not real, but we must treat it as though it's real. Otherwise, you get lost in the sauce. You can meditate your life away. We have to be here in this reality, in this plane in which we exist. And to me, magic is the ability to create change in your life that is meaningful, right? A lot of people, I think, treat magic as though it's like just something happening in those altered realms and has no effect here in the physical world. And for some people that might be very true, and that's an experience that they're having. But I treat magic as a way to change your life here in the here and now. And that's
Yes.
its real usefulness is that you can take your life from being sucky and not fun, and you're miserable every day, and you can use magic to turn your life into a place that you really enjoy being.
Yes, I agree. And one of the things that I am always raising to people, and that I have to remember myself, because this is a perpetual reminder that I have to set for myself and that I try to bring to other magical practitioners, or for that matter, people who are interested in what they might refer to as manifestation, law of attraction. Not my terms. I use selection. I have a different point of view on the matter, but
Yeah.
whatever one's nomenclature,
Mhm.
the stuff that reaches us through magic, through mind metaphysics, there are two great likelihoods, it seems to me. One of these great likelihoods is that the stuff is going to reach us through established channels. Things are going to reach us through tracks that have already been laid in the world. If you need a new apartment for whatever reason, it's not just going to magically appear in front of you, so to speak, but it's probably going to be, well, my friend Mike heard about something and blah, 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 blah. And the other thing is the things that reach the seeker, the querent, they could they could be very ordinary in the manner in which they reach us, so much so that we just blow them off, like, oh no, that can't be right, or just some ordinary thing, it's boring. Or it could be very, very damn unusual. We all have these mind's eye pictures of exactly how something's going to turn out. And there's a tension there because these mind's eye pictures can be very limiting. They're tunnel vision. This happens, for example, and it's happened to me in the past, where this is one of the perennial questions in magic: unrequited love. Unrequited love. We've all been victims of it. It's part of the human story. Shakespeare said so, Led Zeppelin said so, and it's the truth. And if a person feels deeply desirous towards another who he or she wants to be intimately linked to, obviously there needs to be receptivity from the other. The other person is I really don't know how to put it, but you could say some sort of a conscious point of awareness, him or herself, regardless of the non-locality or the ultimacy of the unified field or what have you. You said you're panpsychic, right? So it's like there's these different outcroppings of awareness, of consciousness, of creation, whatever term the individual wants to use.
Fractals of the all.
Right. So, that particle and this particle, maybe have their own vector points, and that has to be respected. And people get so attached, as I have, it's asking too much of the individual not to be attached to the idea that there's this one love that I want. There's this, I can't live without it, and I don't want to hear any logical conditioning of that. But the simple fact is, when love arrives, it's going to arrive in a way that is congruent with the needs of everyone concerned. And so it may not be possible to foster a lasting intimacy through magic or any other means with somebody who has different needs. But that doesn't mean that the individual's spell or patterning or selecting or whatever terms you want to use is in vain, because it will come, but it will come through the channels that are most congruent with the needs of everybody involved. And that's true for everything and everyone. If the individual is asking for money, for example, the natural assumption is, let's say I'm a contractor. Let's say I'm an electrician. I'll get this big job at this condo that's going up down the street, and I'll be able to hire guys, and this is going to be great. It could come that way, and it makes a lot of sense that it would come that way, but it might not. It might come in some very different roundabout way. So much so that the querent will say, my spell didn't work. But if you look back and you peel the onion, and you're really being attentive, be very watchful, because it may have come in some way that we've overlooked. I think that might be the esoteric meaning, or one layer of meaning behind all these ancient parables about somebody who demonstrates hospitality to a ragtag stranger, and then it turns out the ragtag stranger is a king or an angel or a genie or a demon in disguise, and they flood the hospitable do-gooder with rewards. And I really like that parable because, first of all, it reminds us that in antiquity, hospitality was a massive virtue that I think we've forgotten about today. And the other thing is that demonstrating hospitality to that ragged stranger could place the person in proximity to some magical being who helps them. And in a way, magic is like that. It's like that stranger. We may not see it coming, and we have to be very watchful.
Man, I want to tell you a brief story. I've told this on the podcast before, sort of. My partner and I even ended up teaching a course on it because I did manifest my partner through magic,
Mhm.
and it was very much like one of those stories that you were just telling. Like, let's say Beauty and the Beast is an example of the, the woman first appears in a horrid way and then punishes the beast with the blah blah blah. You know the story,
Yeah.
but first of all, I would say if you want to manifest love into your life, the fastest way to do that is to work on making yourself into the ideal partner for the partner that you want, to
Mhm.
use magic in that way. But you can certainly also be using magic to bring that person in, which is what I did. But when she showed up, there were so many problems. There were so many. She was moving away. We knew there was a time limit on our relationship, and there was just so many problems that arose because of that. That everybody in my life was like, dude, just like, come on, just get over this girl and
Yeah.
don't bother. And I couldn't do it. I was like, you know what? No, I know that that's not correct for whatever reason. And then she ended up in a bad situation when she moved away, and I would not like let it go, and I helped her get out of that situation, and then she came back home, and we've been together ever since. It was a lot of work that we had to go through, and at any point there was everyone telling me to just walk away. That
Mhm.
it's not your problem, don't blah blah blah. And no, I knew better. So I think that to manifest love comes with trials, and that
Yeah.
you have to be willing to go through those trials. And this is true whether or not you use magic to find love or not. Love comes with trials. And if you're the kind of person to give up or say, oh, no, that's not exactly perfectly precisely what I asked for, so forget it, it's not really going to work out,
Oh,
most
yeah.
likely.
I
Yeah.
think you made a very important point just now that I want to amplify, and that's helpful for me to hear in terms of my own practice. And the point you made is that magic may well need to begin with me, with making myself into the person who can be a good partner, an able steward of resources,
Yep.
someone who's provident.
Mhm.
Um, if the proverbial electrician I was talking about wants to get the job at the new condo, well, are you kick-ass? Are you excellent? Are you reliable? I'm just
Right.
pulling these ideas out of the ether, so to
Yeah.
speak. But the fact is, you've hit upon something. So frequently we want to receive,
Right.
but the necessity may be um, first becoming a self that's capable and
Yep.
worthy of
Ready.
receiving, that
Yeah.
actually has some credit in the world, literally and figuratively, rather than just sort of, asking for more goodies, maybe has paid certain debts and becomes the figure suited to receiving.
Absolutely. And so there's one more thing I want to touch on in that point, and then I want to move on to another subject because I don't want to I do want to get to these questions today. But
Sure.
in that regard, I think that what you and I just kind of said is very true. But listen, especially for all the dudes in my audience, all the men out there, because a lot of people message me saying, how do you manifest a partner? Okay. So I want to address this really quick. Do not, for the love of whatever you believe in, do not get lost in that, Giga Chad dude, bro. I have to make $1 million and have a six pack, or no woman will ever love me mentality. That's
Mhm.
not true.
Right.
It's not true. I am 42. I am out of shape. I am by no means a millionaire, and I have the most beautiful partner in the world. You don't have to be some perfect thing, but what you do
Yep.
have to be is ready, and you do have to be ready to be a good partner. If you're not capable of being a really great partner, then don't ask for a partner.
Right. That's true. It's like you're going to go right into quicksand and you're going to bring somebody else with you. Yeah.
Totally, exactly. And that's the situation that so many people find themselves in, especially if they're doing love magic to like hastily just get someone. you know
Yeah.
that never
Yeah.
works out.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. And I think working on self, um,
Mhm.
listen, there are many different facets that can take. You know, I mean, I often emphasize the importance of keeping one's word. I think that's
Yes.
I think that's probably a starting point for anything in life that you can be proud of and hold your head up about.
Oh, yeah.
But that's just one dimension. It can take many forms, and it's a very intimate question. If a person were to do magic, asking rather, can I have such and such partner? Maybe a different way into that working is to say, may I be worthy of
Yeah,
having such and such partner? And shit may start to happen pretty
totally.
wild. May start to happen
Absolutely.
right away.
Yeah, because you start to attract it. As you become what you this is the hermetic this is vibration. If you vibrate on the level that is attractive, magnetically attractive to that partner, that's on the level that you want to attract. So let's say the person you want to attract is this vibration, and you're at this vibration. What do you need to do? You need to get yourself up here so that you're a match.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's terrific. I think there's a bravery in that. There's a constructiveness in that. And if people who are stuck with magic, maybe they don't feel like they're getting from point A to point B as they would like, maybe they need to flip the equation and ask, may I become worthy in such and such a way? And the path to that worthiness may be a combination of intention and circumstances. So watch out. Be sure you want it. Be sure you
Be sure
want it.
what you want it, and also be careful what you wish for. All right, that's
Hmm.
an important one when it comes to all magic, and that's perfect because that leads me perfectly into my next question, which is for everyone who gets stuck with magic. What do you feel? It's a two-part question. What do you feel is the primary issue that people who really want to get into this world and have success with magic but aren't having that success? What's the primary issue, and how would you advise that they go about alleviating that issue?
Listen, first and foremost, I want to say I'm right there in the trenches with them because I've had any number of times in my life, distantly and recently, where I feel stuck with magic, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to ask myself, what's going on here? What's the problem? I think you just touched on part of it. Being a person who is worthy of that. Um, I would again say be very, very watchful because the assumption that your operations are not working may require some further scrutiny. Take a second
Mhm.
look. Take a second look because we as a human species are famous for turning out things that reach us because they seem too conventional, or seen from a different perspective, they seem too weird. And people think, oh, the answer can't come that way because that's conventional medicine, and I'm not down with conventional medicine. Well, let's forget about what we are and are not down with. It may come in all kinds of different ways, and don't be allowed to feel um, like you're being like you're betraying principle if that solution, I'm just saying, comes in the form of a pill. Maybe it will come in the form of a pill. How do
Mhm.
I know the way that mysterious stranger in the parable is acting? The idea that a mysterious stranger is blowing through my village. Maybe in antiquity that would have set off some alarm bells and being like, I'm not so sure about this guy. Well, today some of us are, I'm not so sure about allopathic medicine. I'm not so sure about alternative medicine. I don't want to take a pill. I don't do Reiki. I don't do woo woo.
Mhm.
Just relax, drop some of the prejudices. Prejudices are a real barrier, I think.
Mhm.
And I have been stuck at times, and I have felt that I needed to take a back to basics approach. I was maybe like doing too much, and instead of instead of making one appeal after another to a pantheon of deities, and
Yeah.
doing the visualization, the affirmation, the candle, the apparition, the alchemy, the this, the that. Sometimes I've needed to like say, "Whoa, clear the deck." Let's everybody just go back to our dorm rooms and start new tomorrow. And I
Yeah.
might get back down to basics with something very, very simple, like one simple meditation or one simple affirmation.
Mhm.
I do believe, I don't think that there are any intrinsic barriers, but I do believe that obviously the emotions need to be a part of it.
Right.
I did a spell once upon a time. I was up all night doing it, and it was arduous. I personally did not feel that the spell worked, because I was experiencing a degree of exhaustion. I wasn't really I was I was I was dedicated to seeing it through, but the emotions were not employed. I think the emotions have to be employed. I consider the psyche an amalgam of thought and emotion, and I think that's helpful. At the same time, I also recognize with some sympathy that a person who's suffering from grief or depression or anxiety is not always able to summon those emotions.
Right.
And I do not believe that Mother Nature played a cruel trick on us. Well, sorry, no emotions, no breakthrough. I think sometimes repetition, I think it can help. We don't know how the invisible world works, and we don't know the point, place, and timing at which an entreaty that didn't work 40 times earlier will suddenly work on number 41. I've seen it happen. And these things occur in very peculiar ways, and it may just be that there's an alignment. I know we talk a lot in magic about effortless effort, and I respect that, and I abide that, and at the same time, life is a paradox. And hand in hand with that effortless effort is also what Gurdjieff called unwavering perseverance, which he thought was a metaphysical law in itself. And that if you demonstrate unwavering perseverance, you kind of put nature in your debt in a certain way. And he writes very eloquently about that in an essay called The Material Question in his book, Meetings with Remarkable Men. So I would direct people to that. It's not easy reading. And I distilled his point very succinctly, but to hear it directly from him and to realize the gravity of his search and the physical danger that he and his colleagues were in at times, the conditions under which they were operating, will make a person respecting of that statement.
Yeah, I agree too. I'm not the biggest fan of the term effortless at all. And I actually understand that that is partly like a problem that I have because I like to earn everything that I have. I like to work hard for it. I like
Yeah,
for my persistence to pay off. And sometimes I feel like that tendency of mine is a block in terms of things just coming in a much easier way.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
I agree. I have a
Yeah.
sticker that I give out to people sometimes. I must have one around here somewhere. It's called Un Momento.
Mhm.
Let's see what's in the Cabinet of Wonders. Oh well. Huh. Now you know what's in the Cabinet of Wonders. Fucking mess. Um, I printed up these stickers which say "Die Trying." So who am I to talk about effortless
Yeah.
effort? I understand persistence better than I do effortless effort,
Yeah.
and I can't get hung up on one or the other. There's an hour for effortless effort. There's an hour for die trying. And another hang up that people get into on the search is the inability to sustain paradox. We just have to be able to sustain paradox. If I get into this recipe making that it's either perseverance or effortless effort. Sorry, folks, choose. That's just not accurate.
Yeah. It's not.
It's yin and yang,
Yeah.
as above, so below.
Absolutely. Different modes of manifestation. And this is, something that I've realized throughout my time doing magic is that there's definitely at least three different roads when it comes to getting your goal met through magical means. I have at many times, and Anton LaVey actually mentions this in the Satanic Bible, which I think is brilliant. Um, you can get magical results out of desperation, out of
Yes,
perseverance, or out of faith. And that's the effortless effort versus the perseverance. And then there's also the desperation where like you need $10,000 tomorrow,
that's
right?
fucking
And
right.
I've been in that situation and gotten the $10,000 the next day because it was magic out of desperation, but that's not my preferred mode of doing magic. I don't want to feel like that all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's great, and I think desperation. I've used magic in states of desperation, just like you were describing, and I've gotten places. And
Mhm.
yes, it's not my preferred mode of living. I don't want to walk around desperate all the time. Well, at least it produces magic, you know. I
Yeah.
think there's so many. I mean, listen, there's as many folds as there are folds of the psyche, and
Mhm.
I think that I can't limit the human experience to one mode of operation. Have faith that you'll receive and you'll receive. If a person is oriented towards Abrahamic scripture, if that's your orientation, well, go ahead and look at Abrahamic scripture because Cain argues with God and says, "You're making me into a wanderer around the earth. I'm a nomad. I'm going to be killed by somebody." This comes back to this question of helping the stranger, hospitality. And so Yahweh says to him, "Okay, tell you what, I'm going to put a mark on you, what we call the mark of Cain. And this mark will signify that whomever lays a finger on you and hurts you will be punished many multiples of times." And Cain basically says, "Okay, I can live with that." And then he goes on to found a whole new lineage. I mean, he's one of our ancestors. So if you're into scripture, um, look at how Moses, Sarah, Abraham, Cain, Jonah argues with Yahweh. They're not just having faith that they're going to receive. They're not necessarily engaging in effortless effort. There might be great lapses, and they're saying, "I make a demand." So that's part of Abrahamic tradition as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I think when it comes to mythologies, it's these narratives are so crucial to the human experience, and we've very much lost that in the modern
Yeah.
day. They orient you towards something, right? And it could be Norse, it could be, it could be Abrahamic, it could be whatever suits you. I do think that the ancient religions have more to offer than the new ones because the new ones are new and they haven't fully sorted it out yet.
Hmm.
I think like Greek mythology, it just doesn't matter because these are stories that give you a definite, like a way of looking at the world and looking at the way these characters have walked through the world and the consequences that they've come about as a way of kind of like giving you a roadmap, right? So whichever one speaks to you the most, right? So one of the questions people ask me all the time is, how do I know which deities to work with? Well, which stories resonate with you, right?
Right,
Which stories actually say something to you?
right. I entirely agree.
Mhm.
Um, we as a human species, and even as a pre-human species in our Neanderthal ancestors, have been reaching out to, oh, I don't know, call it non-human intelligences or energies, metaphor that get personified, another metaphor. But
Mhm.
which of those personifications speak to you, and perhaps none for that matter. And I'm really very honoring of people going on their own search in this very anarchistic way.
Mhm.
It's up to the individual how deep a dive to take into history and historical understanding. My dive is very deep because that gives me a great deal of joy. I want to know about the origins of what I'm working with. And I do believe that the astrologer should know something about astronomy, that the
Yeah.
Kabbalah should know something about Hebrew, that the tarot reader should know something about the more quotidian history of the cards before they were reconstituted into a divinatory device. And these are questions that I think just I think they bring richness and depth to a practice. They're not for everyone. They are for me.
Mhm.
And I use those queries to pursue questions of deities with whom I wish to seek partnerships,
Mhm.
deities with whom I wish to seek petitionary relationships, which again, we have been doing since before the dawn of recorded history. Um, I don't think Neanderthals were fashioning the so-called Venus figurines, the bulbous feminine forms that we possess hundreds of,
Mhm.
that are tens of thousands of years old, because they didn't have anything better to do. I'm sure they had plenty that needed doing, um, and they did that because it was functional, it was useful, and in their hunter-gatherer existence, everything had to be useful.
Mhm.
So I think where those visions came from, we don't know. That may be the primal human and pre-human wisdom.
I think it is that then this is just my opinion. This is my thesis. I'm not saying this is true, but I personally believe that the subconscious mind holds a tremendous amount of information about the nature of reality in the universe that the conscious mind simply does not have, and the unconscious is trying to feed it to us through stories, through
Hmm.
images and stories and symbols in a way that generates synchronicity and leads us like little breadcrumbs to where we want to go if we're willing to listen. And
Right.
this kind of goes back to the theory of the bicameral mind, um, and various other kind of more metaphysic takes on the subconscious, because it's a part of the mind we have very, very little access to. I think that what Carl Jung said was dead on correct when he said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. I think that's
Hmm.
absolutely 100% correct. The more you're able to listen to that part of your brain or your mind that's whispering these little secrets to you all the time, the more you don't ignore that, the better off you're going to be.
I think
um
that's
but yeah.
beautifully put. That's beautifully put. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, but to say what it is beyond that, it's very hard. And this is why mythology is so useful, because we can't say it's this specifically, this quantum, thing happening in the microtubules of this part of your brain. We don't fucking know, but we can
Right.
experience it, and it's useful.
I agree. And uh, again, it's like the mysterious stranger. We don't know how it's going to reach us. Does it come through
Yeah.
flashes of insight? Does it come through an idea? Does it come through an idea well executed? Because I think we attach so much importance to an idea that we sometimes overlook that it's really the execution of that idea that's going to matter. We can harness energy from the sun, of course, but it's the execution of that harnessing. Is it through fossil fuel? Is it through
Mhm.
solar? Is it through something else? Do we store up energy into batteries? What do we do? And do we know how to do it? And that faces us at every point in life. Execution.
Ooh. That's so cool. I had never thought about that. Because you're correct. We are harnessing the power of the sun no matter what we're doing.
Matter what we do, right?
Until eventually we get to the point where we have a Dyson sphere, and then when we're getting as direct as we possibly can, we're a couple thousand years away from that technology. But yeah, it's all coming from the sun. That's very, very cool.
All we
Okay,
got. Yeah.
next two-part question. What is your greatest magical success, and what is your greatest magical failure?
My greatest magical success the is coming into a career as a
Mhm.
writer, as a speaker, as a presenter on screen. I had left behind all of that stuff. And I think it is through picturization, visualization, affirmation, prayer, undying persistence that I came into it. Um, I'll give you an example. um, I had left behind this stuff for a long time. I mean, when I got out of college, I worked for a little while in journalism. I didn't like that. I went into publishing. Publishing was good to me financially and in many other ways. I was never really happy in the job. I felt
Mhm.
like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. I didn't like depending upon other people to meet their deadlines.
Mhm.
I didn't like working with agents. There's all kinds of reasons why I was unhappy, but it was good to me. Um, but constantly irradiating from within me was this feeling that I had given up on the more public facing career that I wanted. And I
Mhm.
remember a friend of mine used to reassure me, as friends sometimes do, and say, you are doing meaningful things. Look, take the Beatles. There's John Lennon and there's Brian Epstein. John Lennon was in front of the camera, Brian was behind the camera, but he was every bit the same genius. And it's like, you're right, but I fucking want to be John, not
Mhm.
Brian. And and it was a tough that I felt. Anyway, coming into this career that I have was the equivalent of coming back to everything I had dreamt of as a kid. And that's from my earliest memories up through, I would say, well up through like my teen years, for example. I remember there used to be a vinyl album of Jesse Jackson, the political activist candidate, giving a talk at the Democratic National Convention in 1984. I guess I was maybe a little older at that time, maybe a late teen or something, college. I used to play that record. It's embarrassing to say this, but I have to be frank. Otherwise, we're not really exchanging. I
Yeah.
used to play that record and I would speak, I would mouth Jesse's words in front of the mirror. And I dreamt of having that self-possession,
Mhm.
of being capable of giving a talk in that way, obviously with my own cadences and
Right.
experience and so on. And when I am on Zoom, as you and I are doing right now, I'm having that exact same experience. I am looking into the equivalent of a digital mirror, and although I'm not hearing Jesse Jackson's words in my head, that wish is at the back of it. That wish to speak in so self-possessed and fluid a fashion. He was and remains my hero as a great, great orator. So I define all of that as my most successful magical operation. You asked what has been my biggest failure. Um, I would say my biggest failure, if I had to be just starkly honest with you and your
Mhm.
audience, and what the fuck else are we doing,
Yeah.
is that I never put a big emphasis in my life on money. I just didn't. I put a big emphasis on the work. I wanted to be read. I wanted to be noticed. Jesse Jackson wasn't giving that speech to himself while he was shaving in the mirror. He's speaking to a national audience, and I wanted that. I didn't put quite the same emphasis on money or on certain like conventional, and I don't say conventional in a negative way. Don't get me wrong, certain conventional forms of success. So I find that I'm playing a degree of catch up, with that. And it can be very frustrating because it's like saying, I set sail on the seas and everything's going great. And I forgot to ask for an extra pair of oars. And now I need those oars. And so, that, could you call it a failure? Could you call it an oversight? Whatever it is, there wasn't that completeness. There's the Greek myth of Tithonius, who asks for and receives eternal life, but forgets to ask for eternal youth. So becomes this terribly decrepit figure. Again, every myth is truer than history, whether it happened or not, whether it's a parable, a metaphor, or not. It's the stark truth of human nature. So for me, um, that ask, wasn't there. And I think also, frankly, and I have to face this in a very stark way, I've hosted television shows. I recently hosted a show on Discovery called Alien Encounters.
Mhm.
I was in a movie, I played myself in a movie called A VHS Beyond that was a 2025 Critics' Choice Award for Best Movie Made for Television. I'm pretty fucking proud of that. But the
Mhm.
fact is, I ain't exactly Oprah over here. And
Yeah.
maybe the nature of my search is somehow at odds with a kind of like fame, stardom, popularity. And people say, oh, what does that matter? Well, it matters a fucking lot to me, but
Yeah.
it also matters that my message must have integrity. My
Yep.
message must have integrity. There will be no corners cut. There will be no bullshit pulled. There will be no disrespect for the intellect of the listener and the audience member. And a friend of mine said this to me once upon a time. She said, you want to host a show, you want to be famous, you want all that stuff, right? For that to happen would require a revolution in our culture. And I
Mhm.
knew she was right in a certain way because the hive mind sucks.
Yep.
And most of what's popular today is provocative in ways that makes me want to vomit. I do
Yeah.
not humiliate people. I do not talk trash about people. I am very happy to be disruptive in the name of truth, in the name of the search, but I will not be disruptive as an end to itself, where
Right.
people are getting ridiculed or hurt, or I'm taking advantage of a tragic or ugly situation. There's
Right.
no fucking way I'm doing that. So truth comes first. Truth comes first. And I don't know if that is standing in opposition to my wish to break through. So could you call that a failure? I'm not sure that's a failure exactly, but I wrestle with that in a very heavy way because both those things coexist. You know, the wish for the fame and the being up in lights, and belatedly the wealth that comes with it, which I could do very good things with, coupled with my adamant refusal to compromise the search.
Okay. All right. I want to try and work with you on this for a moment, because I heard a couple things in there that I want to push back on just a little bit. So you are pretty firmly Gen X, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, I was
I
born
think you
November
are.
23rd, 1965, so I may be
Okay.
pre-Gen X.
Maybe. Well, you're kind of. I think you're like where I am, because I'm on the verge of between Gen X and Millennial. And I think you're kind of on the verge there, but you certainly seem like a very Gen X kind of person. Absolutely for that. So here's one of the things that I've noticed about me, because I used to have a very similar way of thinking about money. But I wouldn't say, Mitch, that you forgot to ask for the money, but you did grow up in a time seeing people, if they worked hard and did good, the money would come. And maybe you just made the same assumption, but we don't live in that economy anymore,
That's
right?
for sure.
Right. So that's a huge part of it right there. So I just want to say, don't put the blame on yourself for that, because there was a time when you were growing up and when I was growing up that if you had a job and you did your job well, you could buy a house. That is not how it works anymore.
Right. That's
Okay.
right.
But then I also want to, and this is funny because it leads right into my next question. I want you to imagine four squares, okay, in a box. And we're going to say that there's essentially four types of people in the world. That's an oversimplification, but just for the sake of this experiment, in the bottom left, we've got people with no integrity and no resources. Top left, we've got people with no integrity and high resources. And there's a lot of those people in the world, unfortunately. Then over here, we've got people with high integrity and no resources. Also, a lot of these people in the world. And then in the top right box, we've got high integrity and high resources. And this is the only type of person that can really make a tremendous amount of positive change in the world. So Mitch, you 100%, you've got the integrity. You're very, very dedicated to that integrity. And that's very, very clear the way you speak and in your work and your writing. So I think that if you could just reframe your thinking, and I don't know if this is necessary for you, but it's something that really helped me, and that's why I'm saying it, is to reframe your thinking into, not only do you deserve the resources, but you're exactly the type of person that can do the good things that you want to do with those resources, and
Mhm.
that they should come to you because you're going to do amazing things with them, and to really cognize that and internalize it and not struggle against the idea that maybe the resources only go to this other kind of person, because I know it can seem that way sometimes,
Yes. Yes.
right? But when you can really cognize that, no, high integrity and high resources is, there's nothing about this that's going to turn you dark or in any way, like, I can't stand the hex that has been put onto so many people in the world today because they were taught that money is the source of all evil. That's a curse. To
Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
that
I
is a
agree.
curse.
I agree. I
It's a
agree.
powerful curse.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think you made a very good point, which is that the world that I grew up in,
Mhm.
um, the post Beatles, post Apollo mission world, it was one in which there still existed an economy that I think was um, less stratified, less corrupt. We in the United States now, and I would venture, this is true in Canada as well. Although you guys have done, I think, a better job kind of keeping a social net or fabric together, and I recognize that has its own difficulties,
Mhm.
but people in the United States are so um, fraudulently, criminally defrauded
Yeah.
by health insurance companies, for example, first and foremost, and other sectors of the economy are learning from that. And
Mhm.
that is a grotesque lesson to learn, but they are learning from that. And there used to be in the United States and in Canada, pay grades and things like that. And there was a reasonable expectation of some degree of transparency, some
Yep.
degree of fair play, and that is gone. And for those of us who are in media, that requires extra special attention because the fact is, I've benefited a lot from being in media. I've had development deals with networks and so on and so forth, and I'm fortunate. But I recognize that the mindset in corporate media today is you go off and do it yourself, do your cooking show yourself on YouTube, and then when you have 1 million followers, maybe we'll get involved.
Right.
They are not putting money behind creatives anymore in the form of proposals, propositions. I mean, the world was different even 5, 6, 7 years ago. You might fashion a treatment for a television series and send that to a production company, and they would approach a network. And, it might go nowhere, but there was an economy in that. That has shrunk by more than 20%. And I expect it to shrink by another 20%. And it's tough times for people who are musicians, for
Yeah.
people who are writers, although publishing has stood up better than some of the other forms of media that have been buffeted. Very difficult, for people who present and so forth. In one sense, it's golden age because anybody can do his or her thing over YouTube and so on, just as we're doing right now.
Yep.
But in another sense, that media, it's really it's very often free. It's social, and networks are increasingly hanging back
Yep.
from buying stuff, and they have their own needs and their own concerns. But it's sobering, man, and it's going to get heavier. And COVID, the lockdown really accelerated these trends. And so I take your point that I grew up in a world, and I'm proud to have grown up in a world
Mhm.
where you'd be a real scumbag if you made somebody, chase you for money, chase a contractor for money, or an insurance company would actively refine ways of ripping off sick people. And that's the
Yep.
name of the game in the United States today, the
Yep.
name of the game. So, yes, you're absolutely correct. I guess you could say I come from a world that's more expectant, of there being a kind of social polity.
Yeah. Yeah. They're the social agreement. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but what we grew up witnessing is just not there, and it got slowly pulled out from under you in a way that you didn't really notice. And I'm still catching up to this realization now that you can't just go get a job and then expect that you've got a job that will give you health benefits and that you'll be okay and you'll be able to provide for your family. That's just
Right.
not the way it is.
Right.
But luckily, and I would say, to that person who has 1 million followers on YouTube, which is what we're going to get to on this show, that when
Uh,
the network approaches them and say, "Hey, we'd like to get involved," you just say, "Fuck off. I don't need you. I've got 1 million followers. I'm going to
yeah,
get the
yeah.
2 million and I'll do it without you." Right.
Well, I think that's great. And there's people who do that in publishing. My
Mhm.
books, I bring to publishers. I
Mhm.
have my reasons for doing that. But there are people who self-publish and they kill it and they do a
Yep.
great fucking job. Or maybe they self-publish with some sort of a partner or middleman, not quite at the scale of a publisher. I used to, back in my publishing days, once in a while would run into somebody who was DIY and he or she
Mhm.
was doing just fine. I
Yep.
honor that. It's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. But I appreciate what you're saying. I dig it. Thank you. I
Yeah,
like it.
for sure. I think that we're just coming into an age where things are just changing. The landscape is shifting so much, and we've got to figure it out as we're going. 100%.
Yeah.
I'm certainly glad that I went with a publisher. Also,
Mhm.
self publishing is probably something I would have just been like, I don't have the energy for this.
Yeah. And one
you
has
know.
to take that into account. There's a lot of great artists who tried to self-distribute. Prince,
Mhm.
Stephen King, Todd Rundgren, outstanding artists,
Yeah.
brilliant people. they folded the card table and said, no, I can't do this.
Yeah, because it's a whole other industry that I don't know anything about. I love to write and I love to teach. And I love to talk about magic. I don't know jack about publishing.
Right. I feel that way. That's why I go with the publisher. That's my
Yeah.
thing. And a publisher also pays for, ideally, pays for recording studio space and does other things. And I benefit from those things. So
Yeah.
that's been helpful to me.
Yeah, and I also think that like I said, we're about to open the floodgates on living in a truly paranormal world.
Mhm.
And your services and my services are, I mean, I see every day, my goal, and if you're listening to this, help me achieve this goal. My goal is to get to 500 active students in my Occult University program, which I am very dedicated to, and I pump out new content for that program every single week. I know every single one of my students' first names. I love doing this. I love teaching, and I am doing my absolute best to really build the very best school of occultism that exists on planet Earth. And
Mhm.
when we get to that point of 500 active students, I'm going to be able to like maybe buy myself a health insurance plan. And I'm very happy about that. But just, that kind of thing is becoming more and more and more valuable to people as the veil is pulled back and people are starting to realize that science and spirituality are getting closer and closer and closer together every day. In fact, even on the Diary of a CEO podcast, which is one of the number one podcasts in the world, where it's a very serious podcast, he had a neuroscientist on there just a week ago talking about the reality of spirit communication. Just
Oh, that's
amazing.
fascinating. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. I would say there's an old expression, I don't know who coined it. Millionaires don't believe in astrology, billionaires do. In other words, it's the people who
Yeah.
really have something going on who are more
Yeah.
unconventional. And I think we touched on this before, that the willingness, and I've certainly found this, the willingness to engage metaphysical topics is fairly robust in the hard sciences, in finance, in engineering, the places where there is an implacable wall of prejudice, which is slackening because the culture is changing, are the humanities, the social sciences, legacy journalism. You cannot gain traction in those worlds. And I know because I've done a lot of writing for legacy journalism. At one point in my career, it was very important to me as a validation to have bylines in places like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Politico, and I got them. I got them. And I'm proud of that. But at a certain point, I had to release that campaign, release that effort, because it was as though every day is the first day. Every day you're starting from zero. Every day there's an editor who thinks, oh, you don't actually believe in any of this crap, do you? Or who wants me to say something disparaging in my article that I won't say, that I won't say. I won't say something disparaging about Marianne Williamson. I won't say something disparaging about Oprah Winfrey. I will not say something disparaging about positive thinking, however crappy,
Mhm.
people at the New York Review of Books believe that paradigm is. I understand their point of view. It's very commanding and it's very old fashioned and it's getting very, very um, rickety and sclerotic. The
Mhm.
notion that you can just plug, eyes, ears, mouth, and not have any engagement with metaphysical topics other than as signifiers for something else, or
Mhm.
metaphors for something else, or social kind of fixed ideas that demonstrate methods of control and compulsion. That's very 19th century. That's very insufficient. I understand where it comes from. I understand its gestation, but not long ago, I attended a panel discussion ostensibly on witchcraft at the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art. A friend of mine was on the panel, Pam Grossman. She was wonderful, as usual. The other people on the panel were sort of some sundry academics who seemed to have no interest in witchcraft whatsoever, one of them avowedly so. And they were talking about witch as metaphor, witch as social signifier, and how beliefs are kind of like a ostensibly a corrupting influence, methods of control, and blah 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 blah, and it's very very tiresome, and
Yeah.
it's very very yesterday, and really Elvis has left the building, and they're incapable. In fact, at one point, one of the moderators asked Pam with a tone of slight incredulity, "You don't still practice, do you?" And Pam said, "Why, yes." I mean, it's just startling, the absolute disconnect these people have because they've been educated in a world of letters, social sciences, legacy journalism that dictates parameters of how smart people are supposed to think, of how serious people are supposed to think.
Right.
And we all know what the crap is, and you've got some formidable figures who are doting upon these positions. We mentioned some last time, but I think they're in a position of fading. When I was in college, believe it or not, B.F. Skinner was still read, the behaviorist. Now, B.F. Skinner may have had some outstanding insights on the nature of conditioning, but I think we as a human community realize today that conditioning is a piece of the puzzle to try to devise an entire philosophy of life, an entire existential outlook from that is as absurd as the parable of blind men describing an elephant. One grabs a tail and he's certain it's a snake. The notion that you can rely upon behaviorism to fashion a full 360 outlook on existence is it's quaint. It's faintly ridiculous. Skinner was a good man. I'm not sure he's read anywhere. And I think that people who are resisting any engagement with the metaphysical other than on grounds of seeing it as an example of exploitation or an example of the poverty of our culture, they're wrong. And they don't know they're wrong because they don't have anybody to tell them that. There's no editor to tap them on the shoulder and say, this guy's not so bad. Maybe you should read this. Or don't be so sure that those ESP experiments are crap. Look a little deeper. Go past Wiki. Look a little deeper. And so they're, I think they have an expiration date. I probably have the same damn expiration date. I may not be around to see the generational turnover, but in as much as the generational turnover came for Skinner, it's underway for people who are attached to strict materialism in our culture.
Fully agree. I completely agree with everything you just said. In fact, I have an essay, as we talked about it in This Is Chaos, which is put out by Weiser. Pete Carroll was the editor, and it's about, the book is a compendium of essays to demonstrate the movement and the progression of chaos magic, right? And one of the things that you can see in the book is that a lot more chaos magicians have become very open to astrology, for example, and less materialistic. My essay was called Chaos Witchcraft, but it's really about a theistic vision of chaos magic, which is why I call my practice Chaos Witchcraft. It's not traditional chaos magic. I'm not an atheist, and I'm not a theist exactly either. I'm somewhere in between. And people will frequently ask me, I've been asked this probably more than anything else by some of my students, why do I use the term witchcraft? Why don't, if I'm talking so much about quantum physics and sort of trying to describe things from a very grounded perspective, why do I use that word? Because it's the right word. It's the correct word. That's why.
Yes.
Because that's what we're doing. And I don't want to pretend like we're not and act like we're on some higher level than people who were doing this intuitively without the words like quantum physics or synchronicity or entanglement. Those are just words that are, give us a good set of descriptors, but we're still doing witchcraft. And that's what really, really matters.
I agree with you on so many levels. I don't remember who said it, and I'm borrowing this from someone else whose name escapes me. But there was a writer who said the term witchcraft, and I think this can be applied generally. The term witchcraft has a certain deliciousness to it. She said, I in effect, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't want to call myself a nature mystic. That's fine. But the term witchcraft has a certain deliciousness that I'm looking for. And I think it has historical integrity. And even though witchcraft, like all religions, is much more modern in its iteration today than we think. Although some people are very comfortable with that, and and so much of our religious practice comes down to us in these fragmentary forms, or is maybe a few hundred years old, and we think it's a lot older, and it's gone through permutations. Different issue, but it has historical integrity, and I don't believe in just ceding terms to critics. That's why I use a lot of the traditional terms, right down to New Age itself. The first time somebody asked me if I was a publisher of New Age, I took umbrage because I realized, like any, good little New Yorker, oh, that's supposed to connote everything that's fuzzy-headed and unserious and so forth. And I was insulted. And I thought, fuck that. You need to reclaim these terms. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly, hip hop has taught us that. You need to reclaim these terms. You can't just allow somebody to lord this term over you and be frightened every time it's used. Just tell the truth. Just tell the
Yeah.
truth.
And in that way of thinking, when it comes to the New Age, so I've spent a good amount of time making fun of some New Age stuff. I've made fun of the conspiracy theory stuff. I've
Yeah.
made fun of The Secret. But I do also recognize that all of these things are like the gateway drug into real occultism for a
Right.
lot of people, and that's great.
Absolutely.
It's a good thing.
Yeah. The Secret, I have deep differences with Rhonda Byrne. I've been writing about them for a hell of a long time. My book, One Simple Idea, which is a history of the positive mind movement, came out in January of 2014, over 10 years ago. I air my differences in that book, but I also honor her because The Secret taught a lot of people to think differently about the possibilities of their mind. And that's
Yeah.
a good thing. I have never personally encountered anyone who engaged in ruinous financial behavior because of The Secret. Some people say they have.
Yeah.
I haven't, and I've been walking this road for a long time, in different parts of the country, and we're also interconnected right now. I don't think geography makes a hell of a difference.
Yeah.
Um, but I have to acknowledge admiration for Rhonda because she also stuck to her vision. When The Secret first came out in 2006, 2007, everyone in my world in New Age publishing, at the time I was editor in chief of a division of Penguin Random House called Tarcher Penguin. People were rolling their eyes and saying, how could you call this The Secret? This stuff is 150 years old, or if you want to go back for it, it's like, yeah, I get it. But the fact that she, living where she lived, coming from the perspective she came from, wasn't so inculcated with that naysaying that it cost her vision. She stuck with it. She presented this thing correctly as if no one in the world had ever heard of this before. And another funny thing happened. I mean, first of all, her gamble was correct because as much as New Thought in its modern form has been around and very popular for 150 or so years,
Mm-hmm.
her take was there's enough people in the world to whom this is going to be new, just as it was new to me. Big world. She turned out to be right. Not only was she right, but The Secret as a phenomenon lasted much longer than anyone expected. It didn't flame out after 18 months. It went strong for, 18 years. And I was very interested in that. It said something to me about sticking to your vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's even good things. I had never heard of a vision board before, and
Yeah.
I think that the way it's presented in The Secret is incorrect. That you need to do more than just a vision board. But one of the things that I have all my students do is make a vision board that includes a sigil, and it includes a link sigil that we can all use together. And then I teach, there's more aspects of it, but the vision board itself is an important aspect of it. There's more we can do than just that. Right. So
Yeah.
again, it's like it is the gateway for a lot of people into astrology and numerology and hermetic philosophy, and then into like true witchcraft. And I think that I was into, for me, it was atheistic Leviathan Satanism when I was a teenager. And then I kind of like dove into the new age stuff for a little while and then kind of came back out of that. But there were some really good things I took out of that, like sacred geometry is
Yes.
a really, really interesting practice that exists mostly within the new age sphere that I'm still very, very interested in, and kind of landed in more of this world of chaos magic and witchcraft that I find so fascinating now. And kind of, I know this is gonna be changing topics really rapidly here, but you mentioned something that I thought was really, really interesting. And that, these things have been around for so long and we keep reintroducing them, but that reintroduction is necessary. It has to happen over and over and over and over again with new technology. So earlier, when we were talking about the idealist kind of conception of panpsychism, well, that's just animism.
Yes, exactly. Boom. It's
Yeah.
animism. Right. Been around for a long time.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think every generation needs to find new inroads to these things. Pope John Paul beatified more saints than very possibly any pope in history by a very, very long stretch. And there was a realization that ancient forms need to be married to current needs, and that might take different permutations. St. Clare, for example, in the 1950s by Pope Leo was named the patron saint of television. Look it up. This is official. This is not just what's going on at my hoodoo shop down the block.
Wow.
Although there's stuff going on in my hoodoo shop down the block that's every bit as legit. Uh, St. Clare, patron saint of television. I remember I was in a TV executive's office years ago, production company, pitching something, and she had a little statue of St. Clare on her desk. Now, to her, it was sort of a novelty, a joke. Her office mates probably gave it to her for her birthday. Ha ha ha. I take that very seriously. I have a statue of St. Clare somewhere here in the apartment, and um, and I take that very seriously. There's a new saint. There was an article about him recently in one of the mainstream magazines. Maybe it was Harper's. Um, Rare that they would treat a spiritual topic. Saint of technology, and I forget the young man's name, but anybody who's watching who's current with Catholicism, they will know the name and know what I'm referencing. And these are just ways through one religious tradition that the outlook is updated, is reintroduced. Novelty is very important, whether that novelty is The Secret or whether that novelty is a saint of the internet, whether that novelty is extending the role of a saint to include television. Back in the 50s, it was self-evident that television was becoming the defining medium of that era. It's always necessary. That's what the Kabbalion was for Hermeticism. That's what The Secret was for New Thought. That's what Edgar Cayce was for any number of occult and esoteric topics. And we need these doorways. I need them. I use them all the time. And I've done that since I've been a kid, getting that little star scroll for a dime out of the machine at the Silver Moon Diner in Queens. That set me on my journey at age 9. That brings me to this exchange right now. Where did these symbols come from? Is it true? Why are symbols from ancient Mesopotamia surviving into the 20th and 21st centuries? It's a religious retention. It's possibly the oldest religious retention on earth. You talk to a cynic, he will say, well, that's because, we're all just a bunch of suckers. Well, there's plenty of things we haven't hung on to. I don't think anyone's sacrificed a bull to Zeus anytime recently, but although if they have, invite me over. Astrology as a retention may be the oldest on earth. So novelty can open that up.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's important for people like you and I who want to present this information to the world. That's part of our job, is to find new ways to do it that will latch on, right? It's like, I'm not a big fan of pop music, and I grew up with a very cynical view of pop music. I like death metal. I like Metallica and Pantera and all this stuff,
Right.
Right. But then you got to recognize, well, wait a minute, why is the pop music the most popular? Why is it called pop music? Right? Because there's something about it that latches onto most people. It gets stuck in their head and they enjoy it. And then I realized in my own music career, if we introduce a couple elements of pop music into what we're doing, oh shit, it sounds a lot better now.
I've had that experience. I never thought I would there was music as a kid that I actively hated, and I wanted to listen to the Ramones and the Dead Kennedys and the Sex Pistols, and they were my guys. And And now some of that music I really love because I'm not attaching the prejudice to it anymore. And I'm
Right.
like, oh, Kenny Loggins, Stevie Nicks, that's not so bad.
Kenny Loggins is great, I think.
Joe Strummer, forgive me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, totally, absolutely. Like I didn't think I would ever be a Bon Jovi fan, but I am definitely a Bon Jovi fan. I wouldn't have been in my 20s, but then by my late 30s, like, you know what? This kind of rocks.
Yeah.
I could
Well,
listen to this.
I'm that way with Kiss. It's like when I was a kid, I wasn't so sure about them because I liked the more stripped down sound of the Ramones.
Yeah.
And I was like, New York Dolls, yes, these guys, I'm not so sure. Now I love them. I can't quite tell you why, but I guess they took what the Dolls were doing and they had the vision of bringing it to an arena scale, and they did. And I love them. So, yeah, one has to, I guess you can see that when the prejudices fade away, maybe the novelty has more to offer than you thought. The Dolls were too wild to break through. Okay. But Kiss maybe took some of the edges off. That might not make everybody happy, but they had some edges of their own, and they broke through.
So then our challenge, Mitch, for you and I in particular, and this because I know that you and I have a very similar goal. We need to figure out how do we bring this world of esoteric philosophy and occultism to that arena scale without losing authenticity, without losing, the core of the message, without stripping away too much, right? That's our challenge. And if we do that, just in the same way that I think the story goes that Gene Simmons, put a ad out for musicians, and he said, "What I want to do is heavy metal Beatles." That's the vision, and
Yeah,
and they did that. They did
brilliant.
exactly
That's
that.
exactly that. And Gene had it. He wanted metal, but he wanted melody with
Yep,
metal, and
exactly.
it worked. Um, my work is such that if you're looking for an enemy, I'm not your guy.
Right.
I don't traffic in hate. I don't traffic in enemies. I don't traffic in humiliating people, and I don't abide walls. So if there's somewhere you don't want to go, or you think, oh, Jesus, Horowitz has really crossed a line this time, I have crossed it, and I will cross it again, not because I'm trying to be provocative, but because it's the search. It's the search, and I'm very anarchistic when it comes to the search. Now, everybody has to clean up after the party. So if you're going to have a party, clean up after the party. If you're going to have a picnic, you're going to have to pick up your shit. And so, if you come with me hand in hand into the deep end of the pool, you're responsible for yourself. I'm responsible for myself. I'm also responsible to you in a reciprocal way, which is my core ethic on the path. But beyond that, it's anarchism. And that's what I bring.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important because without that understanding of your responsibility in that, without that integrity, you end up with cult leaders. And very much so. I also I do strive to not be negative, to not to pick a fight, but I do when I see a cult leader, I'm going to talk about it. I've got a couple episodes of my podcast about people who are actively doing harm within this community. I mean that ridiculous person who advocates for human sacrifice. I'm going to talk about that and say no, this is not okay. And one thing
I
I'd
don't
really
think
like to
I've
do.
been invited on his or her show yet, but
Well, good. You got kicked off of YouTube. But yeah, I one of the things I also feel strongly about is helping people avoid joining a cult whilst getting into this world because it's so easy to get sucked into someone's vision of I know the one secret truth, and if you give me all your money, I'll give you the
yeah,
Kool-Aid.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't serve Kool-Aid, and anybody who wants to know where I come from, can read Daydream Believer, for example, because I'm really starkly frank in Daydream Believer about some of my wishes, desires, but also concurrent with those wishes, desires is an adamant insistency upon transparency, upon truth, and I abide reciprocity on the path. And I would never do something to deny another person the same reach for self potential that I
Mhm.
wish for myself.
For sure. Yeah.
That's it. And I think that for me, that checks every box that I need to check ethically on the
Mhm.
path. Beyond that, I do what I wish. So I say, do what thou wilt. Love is the law, love under will.
Yeah.
And and that's my search. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Reading translations of translations, reciting this repetitive catechistic wisdom that I heard somewhere or that somebody heard somewhere. Reading a translation of a translation of a translation of the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada.
Right.
I have an essay that I wrote about primeval Satanism that's on Mystery Achievement, my newsletter. I think it's up free. I try to keep as much up free there as I can. Um, my name is called Disturbance. Thank you, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. I'm borrowing that from their lyric in Street Fighting Man. But anyway, I strip back the onion, as I often try to do, to earliest conceptions of what the Hebrews called Hasatan, the Satan, which one controversial Jewish scholar translates as the disturber, the disturber. And I think that's defensible. So I'm exploring this with some ancient texts and some not so ancient texts, and trying to sort of get down to primeval qualities, because I don't like the manner in which we as a seeking community will seize upon concepts that are modern concepts or that are post-ancient concepts and insist that they are foundational truth. And we really don't know.
Right.
We're really repeating stuff almost in this pull string doll way that we assume is this ultimate truth. I begin this article with an encounter I had on the street with a mentally ill woman who was somewhat violent, but still people with deep challenges can have things to offer if one listens and fucking respects them.
Yep.
And she was really getting up in my face. I was very pissed off at me. And I didn't mean to piss her off, but this is what happened. And so she said to me, change the things you cannot accept. And I said, I dig that. She said, you what? And I said, I dig that. And she thought I was making fun of her. I certainly was not.
Yeah.
And she said, do you know what that is? And I said, of course I know what that is. You reversed the serenity prayer.
Yeah.
And she said, that's right. And then she sort of chilled a little bit. And I liked it. I liked it. Not because she's right, not because she's wrong, but because that's her iteration. Change the things you cannot accept. It is a flipping of the serenity prayer. I got the article wrong. This is in another article called Anti-Serenity, which explores some similar themes. I think it's also free. And serenity prayer has probably supported and helped a lot of people, and bravo. But don't get attached to that, because it's something, it's conditional. It's a decision made by someone else. It may have universal tones within it, and I respect those universal tones, but it's a decision made by someone else. I don't have to abide that decision. You don't have to abide that decision. And so I really feel I'm not interested in provocation, but I am interested in knocking down walls, jumping over them, ignoring them. That's what the search is, not just reciting conditioned translations or modern adaptations that I think are ancient or true or real because they're so familiar.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I love that. And I think that number one, change what you can't accept should be a title of something, a book, a bumper sticker.
Well, it's right there in the article,
That's awesome.
and I give attribution.
Yeah, it's killer. And I think that a lot, though, there's a lot of things that you learn, or that I try to teach my students, at least in magic, that are reversals of some of these things that you grew up hearing. So for example, like I said earlier, the idea that money is the root of all evil is a hex. It's a curse designed to make sure that you have a poor relationship with money and that you view it as a bad thing, which means you're never going to have any. If you want to have money, you have to have a positive relationship with money. And if you view money as the root of all evil, you cannot have a positive relationship with money. Right? So there's that little psychological trick right there. Or another one that people honestly think is good advice, and I think it's terrible advice, is to expect the best but prepare for the worst. You can't do that, because what you're preparing for is what you actually expect. You're just telling yourself that you're expecting the best. If you're preparing for the worst, you expect the worst. You should prepare for the best and expect the best. And if things go wrong, deal with it. But you should, your mindset, especially if you want to have a magical mindset, should be, I'm prepared for the best. I expect the best. I'm going to create the best. I'm going to make what I want happen. I'm going to change reality to suit my vision. And to have that sort of, I think that to be really, really good at magic, you have to have a kind of controlled arrogance about it, that my
I like
magic
that.
does work.
I think that is terrific.
Yeah.
Controlled arrogance. I'm going to quote you, and I'm going to attribute that to you, and I
Awesome.
like that. And right, and if shit goes to hell, well then, you know, deal with it. You know,
Yeah.
start rowing, start swimming, lower the lifeboats, get the fire extinguisher. You know, but yes, I think there needs to be a bullish attitude that I'm doing this, married to attention to detail. You know,
Yeah.
I think you're right. I like what you just said. You know, expect, you know, don't, you get what you prepare for. You know, so I like your principle. And I would add to it attention to detail, which I think is the key error that people make. And I used to see this in publishing all the time, where somebody would get paid, sometimes a fair sum of money, to write a book that they really wanted to write, like maybe a biography of their hero, maybe a yogic teacher or something, you know, maybe someone ancient, maybe someone a little more modern like Yogananda, and they wouldn't do it. They'd choke, they'd fuck it up, and they'd fail at the first sign of opposition. Or they would approach it incompletely. Their notes wouldn't be complete. Invariably, the goddamn manuscript would come in without the pages numbered, and so on and so forth. And I remember one guy had the temerity to send me a manuscript. I guess he thought he was being ecologically responsible. People used to send in paper manuscripts. It was printed on the back of an older version of the book. And, you know, I was like, I can't even invent this. I can't even invent the problems that this is going to cause. And, you know, there is in this somnambulant inattention to detail the seed of every failure. People must pay attention to detail. Be a Zen master. Be impeccable. Be a martial artist. What happens to a martial artist if he doesn't pay attention to detail? Obviously, you know, he gets hit in the head and he's laying on the mat.
Yep.
Life is that, you know.
Yeah, it is. And if you want to, so this is another thing where I think people get really hung up on the word manifestation. For example, you know, I've heard Joe Rogan talk about this, and I thought it was so funny because he's like, that's a bunch of bullshit, it's a bunch of nonsense. But then he'll also talk about accessing the muse. And I'm like, oh my gosh, dude.
Yeah.
Because view that people have of like manifestation is that all you have to do is focus and think about what you want and it'll just happen. No, you have to focus and think and do. You have to do everything in your power to make your vision come true. You have to really take every step in the physical, mundane world that you can. Magic is something that goes on top of ordinary effort. It doesn't replace it.
I couldn't agree more. And I would say that Joe is criticizing a variant of manifestation
Yes.
that's very popular in our digital culture. The reason I don't use the term manifestation or law of attraction, and law of attraction has a venerable history, but it gets used to connote a mental super law that's the only game in town.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about last time, everything is conditional. I believe the ultimate basis of reality is awareness or consciousness, but I experience a complexity of laws and forces, just like we use the example of gravity. It's universal, as a natural law must be, but you're going to experience it different on the moon than on Jupiter.
Mhm.
Water is always H2O, but depending on the vibration of the molecules, it can take these different forms. And I think that people get boxed into a corner because they feel that in order to engage these topics, they have to acknowledge that this is the one mental super law, the only game in town. I
Right.
differ with Rhonda on that.
Yeah.
Now, Neville Goddard, who's I have tattooed over here, who I love,
Awesome.
he promulgates that idea. And in Neville, I love it because it's so eloquent, it's so persuasive, and it reaches me as a challenge. And I also think that Neville, he's the one historical figure who I would most like to meet because I think he was functioning at a level of awareness that may have afforded him freedom from some of the conditioned laws that I suffer. And one hears about this in Hermeticism, for example. One hears about this in the Kabbalion, another area in which the Kabbalion does a very creditable job of exploring a Hermetic theme. The theme in Hermeticism is that all of reality is composed of these concentrically expanding circles. And people sometimes reference this as theurgy, as the individual rises up, so to speak, through these concentric circles. Barriers or sins fall away, whatever language you might want to use. And so you find this in Gurdjieff's work as well. There are stations of reality where the individual might experience fewer laws and forces. Certainly, there are coarser forms of life within our own physical framework that might experience greater laws and forces than I do. A plant might experience greater laws and forces than I do. It's fixed. It needs water. If it's inside, it needs a being to come and give it water, so on and so forth. Its life is very fragile. Our lives are not that fragile, but they're very fragile in their own way. The idea being that these multiple laws and forces might, through some kind of a hermetic process of passing through these different concentric circles, slacken. But I'm not there. So I have to deal with life as it is. Hence, to use terms like manifestation or law of attraction in this fast and easy way, that's not satisfying to me. And I think Joe is arguing with a form of manifestation as it gets presented, but there's different fields within it.
And it's the form that is presented is the one that I see, and this is what I refuse to do personally, because I'm so right there with you about honesty, integrity, right? So I in fact think that in order to be great at magic, you have to be radically honest. You have to be as honest as you can possibly be at all times. Your word has to mean something for your magical words to do something, right? Essentially, what I believe. So what I see so many, because there's so many like spiritual influencers now, that's a thing, that are just doing TikTok, and they're all say, oh, it's the one thing, if you just knew this one secret. And I'm like, it's not one thing, it's a complex web of things that you really have to dedicate some time and study to. And no one wants to hear that, though. They want to hear, if I just do this one spell, my life will be better forever. And that's so disingenuous.
My reason for wanting to, if I could meet one historical figure for wanting to meet Neville, is that he's been such an influence on my life, and I find him such a beautiful, beautiful man. And I don't know Neville. I know him through his work, through his disembodied voice, through his images, and I infer from those things a very substantial, beautiful person. But I don't know for a fact because I've never met the man. And I have met, published, worked with some bigwigs in the spiritual culture, people whose books your audience probably has in their home and has read. And in some cases, they are fucking wrecks. So you can't believe everything you hear because someone has a facility with public presentation does not mean that's how they appear when there's a problem on their credit card statement. And I can assure you, because I've witnessed it over and over and over. And that's why I believe that New Age figures, best-selling New Age authors, um, I call them out for not being more transparent with their public, because the public is misled to believe that they have arrived somewhere. And maybe they've visited, they've taken pictures, but it's more like going on vacation and coming back and showing me your pictures. And after a point, it's like, yo, who cares? You know, I went to the top of the Empire State Building. I saw what New York City looked like. Now I'm back down on the ground. That's a memory. You know,
Yeah.
don't confuse a memory with some sort of constitutional change. So I would ask people, when you see that person on social telling you, do this and you'll get this, you don't know that person. I don't know that person. I've had the experience of meeting my heroes, and some of them are very, very disappointing. Some
Yep.
are okay. And you know, you don't know. And even when you meet that hero who turns out to be not so bad, you know, okay, I'm happy. That person may suffer an addiction that's very damaging. You know, maybe a gambling addiction, maybe a smoking addiction, and for all his or her accomplishments, that addiction does not go away. And I try to be transparent with people because I don't want them to be suckered into believing that because someone says something and presents it well, it's true. I'd like to believe it's true. I believe Neville is telling the truth. I love Neville.
Mhm.
I want to meet Neville because I want to see him when something happens in his apartment building here in New York City where he lived. And the same leak in the ceiling that, you know, has been fixed 5 times springs open again at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
What
Yep.
happens? I'd like to know, you know?
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to remember that that's true of every single human being who's ever lived. Everybody,
Yeah.
no one's perfect. No one. I really, really dislike guru culture
Mhm.
for this reason, that I'm like, we're all just people. No one knows everything. No one's got it all figured out. And the claim that you do is such a red flag to me. It's such a massive red flag. You know, I like people who are honest. I like people who can say, I don't know, who can say, you know, I'm doing my best to figure it out. We're all doing this together. I just think that that is the way to move through this thing that we're all trying to move through. If you're on any kind of a spiritual journey, or not even spiritual but metaphysical journey, you
Mhm.
know, being willing to not know is the key. And yet I see so many people out there who are like, they're on this journey because they want the answer, they want the truth, they want, you know, to know the one secret truth, whatever it is, and they want to know it right now, and they're willing to do anything to get it. And those are the people who get conned. Those people end up in cults,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
So I want to do away with that culture of that existed for like a reason, you know, for a time. I think that it used to be that figures like Crowley would kind of use that mysticism of and that allure of mystery to get people in and then teach them like real metaphysics. And I think
Mhm.
that's really great. But then there's other people who just want to reel them in and take their money and then nothing else. You
Yeah.
know?
I know those people are out there in great number. I
Yeah.
encounter few of them because I have nothing to offer them.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, they're not going to get much in the way of communication from me. And
Yeah.
so as such, I encounter them very rarely. Although, you know, being a person in the culture, I'm aware of them being out there.
Well, yeah, and it's difficult. And even, you know, when I first reached out to you, I'm like, he's not gonna answer me. He doesn't know who the fuck I am. You know, I could just be some guy. But you know, I'm really glad you did. And then we got to do this show because you're a hero of mine, and I've met some of my heroes also, and it's still sometimes a very disappointing experience.
Yeah.
But certainly this has not been. And yeah, it's just I like honest, genuine people. I think that, and I like to give people honest, genuine conversations that we
Yeah.
have on this kind of podcast where we can say enough things aren't perfect. You know,
Right.
certainly I'm at a point in my life where I would agree with you. My greatest magical accomplishment has been manifesting that I do this full time now. Right, and
That's
I'm
good.
going on just about 1 year of having been doing this full time. But man, like I'm not there yet. I'm doing this full time, and every month is a struggle. But every month I
Yes.
get, I try harder, and I try to provide more value to people, and I want people to join. And if you're listening to this, come join, come take a course, come
Yeah.
join the
Yeah.
school, buy a ritual, get a tarot reading. I'm
Right.
here
Right.
for you for all of those things. But like, yeah, the fact that I've gotten that I can say this is my job. Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. It's incredible.
I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful. And I think that also the individual the individual has to be willing to pay for things on a reasonable scale. I'm a terrible capitalist. I suck. I post
Yeah.
everything free. I do everything free and so forth and so on. But the fact is, the individual has to be willing to pay for art. The notion that every work of art, every song, every movie, every picture should be free is so corrupt and is so
It's
degrading of the artist's work. And likewise, the spiritual practitioner. Um, people, we put our money where our values are. And I'm shocked sometimes. I'll take my kids to a sporting event and, in the blink of an eye, I spend $80 on snacks,
yep.
on some beer and pretzels, the blink of an eye. And that same $80, would I use that to buy a subscription on Substack to the newsletter of somebody I love? Well, I actually do. But a lot of people won't do that. And I think that we have a very different relationship with things that we pay for versus things that we receive for free.
Right.
A lot
Yes.
of people dump on the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi because it's too expensive to learn TM. And I understand that. And I think sometimes those prices did go up too high. And I had a problem with that. And the David Lynch Foundation has, I think, worked very effectively to sort of bring those prices down a little more and to provide teaching TM free to veterans, first responders, school kids, and so on. I think that's positive. But at the same time, um, it is far too complex to just say like, oh, the Maharishi in our favorite digital era term is just grifting with charging people for TM. He really, he told a friend of mine, after I'm gone, they're never going to understand what we were trying to accomplish here. They're just never going to understand it, and I know that that's true. And the money that we piss away on nonsense, but complain about spending, a few $100 to get a mantra. I know it's a lot of money, and it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone, and I recognize that. But people spend the equivalent and far, far more than that on talk therapy, for example. And if it's
Yep.
effective for them, then keep doing it. But no one would bat an eye. This was Freud's innovation. If we make this into a white coat doctor, environment, then not only will we be accepted, but people understand paying a doctor and so forth and so on. And in spirituality, that broke down, partly because of our problems as a human culture that thinks stuff should be free, and partly because of there are, of course, bad actors. Of course, there are bad actors. But my God, I mean, Gurdjieff would stay one step ahead of the bill collector, and people wouldn't want to, give him money. They'd want him to come out to some little village outside of St. Petersburg to teach, and they wouldn't want to so much as put him up at a hotel. And that behavior is problematic too. So I guess all I'm really trying to say is that our money is our values. Our money is our values. And if you think magic is going to change your life, which is a good gamble, I would say that's a good gamble. If you've got the right teacher, your classes, your work, then you have to be willing to pay reasonably for that. You
Yep.
know, I didn't, buy my first Ramones album by walking into Record World and stealing it. I paid for it, and I'm glad I paid for it because I love them, right? So we have to be in that headspace as well.
It's very, very important. And it's also a part of having a positive relationship with money is
Mhm.
understanding that you spend on what you love and what you value. I do everything within my power to keep my prices as low as I possibly can.
Yeah,
You saw in the ritual package I sent you, it comes with an ebook, it comes with an instruction guide, it
I
comes with
could
a
do
5 working
that.
bedrooms. and it comes with the audio track that I spent hundreds of dollars and a month making, and I sell it for $10.
That's right. That's right.
It's a $10
10,
product.
$10. And let me tell you, people listen to an audiobook of mine, for example, whatever it is. I don't have an audio studio at home. I have a publisher who pays for me to sit in a booth at a professional studio, an engineer to edit that, a QC person to go over it. We go back in, we fix all the fuck ups or the noise or the mispronunciations or what have you. We pay an artist good money. This is a cover I like on my book, Practical Magic. This wasn't free. This was paid for. There's a wonderful artist named Tom McKevney who I try to work with all the time. And Tom designed this cover. So you're holding an object of beauty in your hands. You're listening to something that's beautiful because it's been well produced. Resources went into that, just like the food that's on your table. And we can't look blindly at that, and we can't depend upon, well, because it's available, because I can go on a fishing expedition and maybe get it free somewhere. I would say be careful about that stuff. Be careful about that stuff because, again, I'm not going to put too fine a point on this, but you have a different relationship with stuff that you pay for versus stuff that you get for free. And I think the Maharishi understood that. That's what I'm going to.
The last thing I want to say on this topic is that it's one thing I do at my school is I occasionally give away a scholarship to a program. I usually do this only. I don't have there's no application process. I'll do this on a case by case basis. I don't know if I'm going to continue doing it, to be honest, because out of, let's say I've done this 10 times. One of the 10 times has that person who I gave a full scholarship to a program of mine that cost $300 to $2,000.
Yeah.
Have they shown up consistently? Which is the only thing I ask when I say I'm going to let you do this. Show up consistently. Be the first person to raise your hand. Show me that you're really here. And they're always the person that I can't make it today. I'm late or
always an excuse. I know.
Yeah,
I'll tell you a story, and I'm going to name the person who told this to me because I don't think he would mind me naming him. I'm friends with Bob Roth, a meditation teacher who's the head of the David Lynch Foundation. Just saw him over Labor Day weekend. We meditated together. Wonderful man. Done a lot of good in this world. Done a lot to make TM free for first responders, school kids, and so forth.
That's cool.
He's told me, people come to him all the time and say, I'd like to learn TM, but it's too expensive. And he says to them, write me a letter as to why you want to learn, and I will teach you for free. Bobby learned from the Maharishi himself. Okay. So when you're getting that offer, pay attention. Not 1 in 10 people rate that letter. Not 1 in 10 people rate that letter. That's human nature.
Yep. There you go. It's because they don't value it. That's why they want it for free. Because they don't place the right amount of value on it. And not to be, I totally understand being broke. I've been broke most of my life. And, but if you don't have the financial means to pay for something that's truly important to you, offer something else, and at least your presence.
Exactly. You don't want to subscribe on Substack, go buy me a coffee. I've got people who email me with questions. I never ask for money.
Yeah.
But they will sometimes send me, long questions, and I pride myself on making myself publicly available. Anybody who wants to reach me, my email, the same one that the power company uses, is freely linked on my website because I don't like walls. I don't hide people. And anybody can reach me. And people, sometimes they do value it. Sometimes they do. And even if they're broke, they might do something, or it might be a token amount, whatever. But yeah, a lot of times people want something for free because deep down they don't value it. And then they wonder, why isn't this working? Why, and that's for the individual to wrestle with. That's for the individual to wrestle with. And I think I'm not going to answer that question for another person. I'm not that question is for me to hold. But what is the relationship to something we receive for free versus something we pay for? It is a different relationship, and the
Yeah.
individual has to sit with that question.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not for everybody, but for, in my experience, for the vast majority of people, if you value something, you're willing to pay for it, and it's just that simple. And that's why, again, like, I keep my prices as low as I can. I'm not trying to create some big paywall. I'm thinking, okay, so for example, the astrology course is starting on the 9th. The price is $299. It's $25 an hour. It's
Mhm.
3 month long program, so it's $100 a month. I know people that charge thousands of dollars for a 3 month long astrology program. I'm not going to
Right,
do that. I would
right.
rather have more people show up and get to share this information with more people, keep the price low, and it's just that's a more joyous experience for me.
I dig it. Yeah, I dig it. Um, these are fraught questions. I have an essay up, of course, free on on mystery achievement, my Substack newsletter called "Spirituality and Money," and I encourage people to read that because I believe at this point in my search that nothing is more revealing of essential selfhood than how a person handles money. Not because money is of ultimate importance and not because money is even real. I mean, it's really perception to a great extent. But because it is the most concrete routine exchange that we experience with one another. And that exchange is one of many exchanges, including some that are extra physical. And that exchange, which I think is both physical and extra physical, is passionately felt, is emotionally felt, and is ever present, and is routine, but for all its routine, is no less emotionally charged. How you deal with money is who you are. It's that simple. And it could be uneven too, just as our character is uneven. There could be times in which Jacob Needleman used to call it the yoga of money.
Mhm.
There could be times where you give. There could be times where you don't give. The implication of the yoga of money is that you bring intellect to it. You bring some awareness to it, not just this kind of knee jerk thing. And that awareness could move you to give. It could move you to not give. And that awareness might be absent. It might be lacking most of the time. And that tells us something about ourselves.
Yeah, and it's interesting. My partner asked me, we were having like real talk a few weeks ago, and she said, "Do you perceive yourself as someone who's good with money?" And my answer was, "I perceive myself as someone who's learning to be good with money. I'm not a person who's great with money yet. It's something I'm perpetually getting better at as I get older and I get wiser. I certainly, in my 20s, terrible with money. Absolutely the worst with money. Now that I'm in my 40s, I'm a penny pincher, and I like it that way. And maybe I feel like this isn't who I wanted to be, but then you realize, wait a minute, there's value in being someone who doesn't spend frivolously. There's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of value in understanding I can always have the thing, so I'd rather just have the money. If I absolutely need the thing, whatever it is, maybe I'll purchase it, but I can just appreciate it without owning it also. I don't need to fill my
Yeah,
house up with junk, you know?
right, right. I dig. I
Yeah.
dig. Very
Uh,
fraught question on the path. Money.
it is. It's
It's
complicated.
yeah, yeah,
It's
very,
worthy of its own book. In fact, and that's why there's many, many, many books on magic and money and the relationship between money and spirituality. It's a complicated topic
yeah.
in
I'm
so
thinking
many
about
ways.
that as a topic for a book at some
Yeah.
point.
Which we're just past 2 hours, Mitch. So I think we're gonna call it here. I still didn't get through all of my questions because talking to you is just you're such a great speaker, and I could ask you one question and we could probably do a whole podcast on it. And I love that. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this again. I
Pleasure.
think that this was another
Do
great
it again.
conversation that I can't wait to
Yeah.
share with people.
Likewise, my man. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the integrity and the effort and the hard work and the attention to detail that you bring to the spiritual culture. Very important. And I'm really digging our exchanges.
Me too, man. That means the world to me. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
All right, thank you everyone. See you the next time. Cut. Oh my gosh, dude.
That's
It's
great.
almost
Time flies. Time flies. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, man. Thank you. Really, honestly, thank you so much for doing this.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Do another.
I'd love to keep in touch. You're someone I'd like to bounce some ideas off of once in a while, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Right on. Very cool. I never mean to pester, but
No, don't sweat it.
Yeah.
Don't sweat it. It's fine. Yeah.
Right on.
Great. And so you have what you need from me, the pics and all, and I'll look forward to it and I'll share it,
Yeah, hell yeah. I'm gonna try and get it pumped out right now. I do have a tarot appointment in 30 minutes, but I think about 2 hours from now I should have it up on the internet.
That's amazing. Great. I'm hyper that way, so that's terrific. Yeah.
Killer.
Cool.
All right,
All right,
thanks,
man.
dude.
Thank
Talk to
you.
you later.
Okay,
Bye.
talk soon. Bye.